Okay, I feel like I need to make more WWE content. So, Raw was good. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, Raw was a 10 out of 10, a 9 out of 10, a 8 out of 10. For the most part, Raw was a solid 5 out of 10. Started off good and fell flat after that. That's all that happened on Raw. You know, and what is with this mass men thing with Triple H? You got Seth Rollins doing the mass men thing. Then you have Americanos fighting each other. They wearing masks. Then you have Dragon Lee versus Penta. Some more masked men. It's too many masked men on Raw. You know that this has to stop. And I'm not about to go segment by segment with this. I mean, it's Wednesday. I might post this video today, or I might post it tomorrow, and then boom, SmackDown. So I'm late with the Raw review, but I don't care. I just think my channel doesn't know where to go. The algorithm don't know where to send people. So here's some more WWE content. You know, Brock is definitely helping out Obafemi. I didn't think Brock was going to actually help Oba. You know, people are saying Brock was yelling, put your foot on my chest and point at the WrestleMania sign. And, you know, maybe Brock is helping Oba. Or you could be yelling at him like, look, you fool, like, we rehearsed this. This is what you should do. You're losing your moment right now. You're messing up. I don't know. But I think there is a respect thing. You know, kind of like how Drew McIntyre was saying, where Drew McIntyre was saying, like, man, he didn't like that everyone in WWE didn't look a certain way. They didn't have muscles. They were flabby. You know, they didn't look like, you know, that they belong there. Oba is one of those people that looks like he belongs there. And I think maybe that's why I can see Brock willing to do the job for Oba. Because Obafemi looks like he belongs there. He's the only person that looks like he can go one-on-one with Brock. You know, you had Omos, but Omos was the tall giant that needs to be toppled. You know, like the Great Khali, like that's like Omos' character. You know, Oba is like a beast. You know, he I don't want to say reminds you of Brock, but he gives that aura where they can go toe to toe. You know, Rusev, like I said, he isn't Oba. You know, Sheamus kind of looks like he could go. He has that body. Rusev doesn't really have that body, but that's fine. You know, Oba looks like, you know, fall from grace he gave to Brock was wild. You know, and I like Brock sold the move. You know, they did everything perfect with that segment. You know, we honestly thought, you know, they pulled the turn. You know, I thought Brock was coming out there to damage Seth, like really put the beating on Seth. But now Brock has Oba to worry about. And I think we all thought that Brock was going to be doing open challenge matches until they got to WrestleMania. But I'm glad they did it the way they did it this way. Now, my other question was, is Raw cooking and SmackDown, they kind of cooking, but it ain't like Raw that just passed. You know, did it get a little better because Road Dogg left and that lady took over? I don't know. I think that might be some scapegoatish stuff right there. You know, I don't know. But It shouldn't be this hard to book stuff like this. You know, we all knew, I'm not even going to go over the AJ Lee versus Bayley. We all know Bayley was going to lose that match. Of course they're going to do Becky versus AJ Lee at WrestleMania. Of course. Like y'all thought they wasn't? And now Bayley's going back to the tag team division. Bayley, please leave WWE and go to AEW. And be with Mercedes Moné. At least, you know, Bayley's time really came. You know, they gave Bayley a nice little run in what? 2022, 2023 or something like that. I think Bayley might have still been in Damage Control. You know, and they had that whole feud where she got kicked out and stuff. You know, Bayley and Asuka and Becky Lynch, you know, and Bianca Belair is getting there. You know, Nia Jax is kind of getting there. You know, those are the older wrestlers. There's too many wrestlers that have to come from NXT, and there's too many that's on the roster now that need pushes because they're not doing any other feuds. There's no reason, you know, Bayley can't be feuding with somebody else and get her to WrestleMania. Like, it doesn't have to be a title match. They can just have a feud. You know, it doesn't have to be for a title. She can just have a compelling story. You know, with, you know, just kind of like Maxine is doing with Natty. But no one cares about that feud anymore, and no one cares about Natty because y'all didn't pull the trigger on her a while ago. But props to WWE giving us Natty. They didn't give us Killer Cross. They didn't give us Ron Killings. They gave us Natty, and they let Natty character run wild kind of in AAA. Now she's at the main roster, but why is she fighting with Maxine Dupree? Why isn't Natty fighting AJ Lee at WrestleMania? Well, I wouldn't put her at WrestleMania. I would save the Natty character for Raw. Let her terrorize Raw. You know, I like, there's better ways that they could have given Natty to us. Then, you know, like I said, I'm not mad that Dom dropped the title. You know, I think it had to be something worthwhile to make Dom turn on Finn. So Dom dropping that title to Penta was fine. Now that Penta has the IC title and there's no feuds you can really do, and they bet not do Gunther versus Penta. That sounds nice. There's no feud there. I would just take that IC title, and you know, this would have been the time to maybe do the El Grande. Like, this was the whole point of El Grande. You know, the original El Grande, to be El Grande. You know, Chad Gable left to go to Mexico to learn luchadoring, to learn the ways of the luchador, and beat Penta. That was the whole story that they just abandoned. Now Penta has the IC title, and now you have two El Grandes fighting each other. You know, if they don't do El Grande versus El Grande mass versus mass match at WrestleMania, that was pointless. Or in this El Grande nonsense, well, in the El Grande versus El Grande nonsense, go back to the OG El Grande versus Penta and let that come full circle. That was the whole point of Chad Gable going to Mexico, learning the ways of the luchador to fight and stop Penta. Why have we abandoned that? I mean, I know Chad Gable got hurt. You brought in another El Grande, but the El Grande the other El Grandes should have, Penta should have beat them. That at this point, the El Grandes just got dumb. It just got dumb. I would just end that El Grande nonsense right now and let them do. It should have ended on Raw, Mass versus Mass, and then the OG El Grande versus Penta, WrestleMania. Mass versus title or whatever, and let Penta go over and we get Chad Gable back. That's how you end that. Now Penta versus Dragon Lee, it was a good match. It was no story. It was that open challenge nonsense. The match was good. That's what I expect on Raw. That should be on Raw every other week. And then, I don't know, some other stuff happened, could care less about it. The CM Punk versus Roman Reigns, talking. At this point, Roman is a million times better than Punk on the mic. I don't know if that's because Punk's holding back or what they're doing. Roman is killing Punk on the mic, which makes me think Punk is going over at WrestleMania. If we go week after week after week, segment after segment, Roman's coming on top. Punk punched Roman for calling him old. Roman didn't do nothing but laugh. But it's very odd because Roman still came out on top, of that segment. And Punk is probably going to beat Roman at WrestleMania unless the bloodline jumps in. And people are getting the impression that, Roman is uniting all the bloodlines. Maybe they're going to bring in Zilla Fatu, for something, I don't know, but I doubt it. I really highly doubt they're bringing in Zilla Fatu. But Solo Nim is jobbing out to Uncle Howdy Nim on SmackDown. I would really prefer, it almost seems like the My Family Tree versus Uncle Howdy Nim, it seems like that whole feud belongs on NXT. That is a very NXT feud that's going on. The only way you're going to make me want to see the MFTs versus Uncle Howdy Nim, the Wide Six, if there's a major stipulation and it's a 4v4 or 6-man tag ladder match or TLC match or Extreme Rules match, that is the only way you can make anybody want to see that feud. Uncle Howdy is a jobber. Everyone in the Wide Six are jobbers. They're not even letting the chick in the Wide Six wrestle. She's getting paid to dress up and, she's doing her character. But the Wide Six had aura when they first debuted. Everyone was watching. They was like, man, this is how you do horror. And they dropped that ball so much and changed their music, which sucks. It's it's the same thing they did with Julia. Julia was the number one women's wrestler in 03. I don't think it was 20. It might have been 03, not 03. Oh my God. 23 or 24. Julia was the number one women's wrestler of the year. Now she goes to SmackDown. She doesn't job out. She got nice entrance music. She got nice attire. Where are the toys? Where are the shirts? Where's the merchandise? Where's the story? You popped that title on her twice and did nothing with her. And Julia can go. We saw Julia and Stephanie go at it in NXT and had the crowd, like, they were main event and stuff on NXT. Then they had their match, I don't know whether it's on Raw or something, I don't remember, but Julia and Roxanne came to Raw. Man, Julia don't care nothing about Rhea Ripley being strong and all that. Like, that's the thing. Julia is a main eventer. And they dropped that ball. You know, Julia should have never been in this U.S. title picture. Julia needs to be on the main roster card fighting. You know, she could be a heel. She could be a heel, but she needs, honestly, that would be fine that she's a heel because they always need heels. You know, but she can go with Tiffy time. She can go with all these people. I think it's maybe because she's more on the skinny side that they don't want to use her, but they're making Kiana James more of a star than Julia, which is perfectly fine if they had no interaction. You know, Kiana James versus Julia would be good. You know, Kiana James could be main event card, but why? You know, Julia should have been in the Elimination Chamber, but she's the U.S. title. She's the women's U.S. title champion. Give her opponents that are worthy. Man, the people that's booking this show is horrible. You know, but, you know, like I'm saying, people saying Raw was a 10 out of 10, a 9 out of 10. This was a 5 out of 10 Raw, which is fine. Just keep coming. If they kept coming with the 5 to 6 out of 10 Raws, I think they were watchable. You know, they could be watchable if it's at least a 5 or 6 out of 10. If they start going back to the 2, the 1, the 0 out of 10 Raws for 3 hours, stop. Like I say, SmackDown wasn't all that great. You know, just because Randy Orton randomly turns heel and beats Cody up, they get some blood, okay. That's supposed to make SmackDown a 10 out of 10? Because Cody put ketchup on his face? That is garbage. That is garbage. Like, Randy and Cody, they're rushing this story. Everyone knew they're gonna rush this story. But but go pay $10K for them tickets. Go do that. You go pay $10K for them tickets and let us know, was it worth it? But I'm gonna look forward to SmackDown. See if they're gonna cook up something. And the next week on Raw, we're gonna see if they're gonna cook more. Honestly, I have no hope that they're gonna cook. They won't be able to recreate that magic that Oba and Brock recreated for those, 10 seconds max? But that was a good way to start the show. You know, they started the show off good, but man, Raw went from a 5 out of 10 right there and went all the way downhill. Now, I'm pretty sure, if I had to guess, I'm pretty sure it's going to be like Javon Evans versus Penta, like open challenge or something. Dragunov versus Carmelo Hayes for the 1 millionth time on SmackDown this Friday. That's the type of stuff we're going to get. But damn, like, this video is 19 minutes long. I'm about to cut this off because Raw, I'm pretty sure y'all watch C-Jax, BC Amplify. You know, more Jade Cargill news later on in the week. Like, comment, subscribe.